Well, good afternoon, freedom fighters and Alberta patriots. Here we are for another brief session on some of the problems that we're facing in this week and what's been in the news. But the big one, of course, would be the budget. Billions of dollars, $18 billion deficit, second largest only to last year, $20 billion. We got more lockdowns, but they tell us that we're not locked down anymore. And again, I want to talk a little bit about the media and government fear mongering that continues on, and some of the shocking things that have happened. And most probably relevant at this point is the resignation of Mark Matson on the Canada pension plan, which was to me just very interesting news, and to kind of wrap around where people's heads are. But let's start off with the budget. I don't think there's anything more important in your personal life and in your business than having a budget and realizing where you are and where you're going. And the most disappointing thing of all in this budget is that there is zero plan and zero possibilities of balancing it out to 2023 now. And they basically admitted that. Number two, that I found quite interesting when our finance minister says, is that now is not the time to talk about raising taxes or doing anything. But when is the time? And I think that's what they're saying is that, well, we're going to have to do that, but now's not the time to talk about it. And so that kind of be like on the 11th of December last year. We understand how bad we hurt small businesses. We're not going to shut down Alberta again, and we're just not going to do it. It's bad. And then a week later, what do we have? A massive shutdown across the province. And I feel the same way about the budget and where we're going on that. How long will we delay the discussion before they actually talk about what they're going to do? And the lockdowns, it is troubling to me to keep hearing that, well, the lockdowns, there aren't lockdowns anymore. I went by a gym yesterday that normally has quite a few people in it, fitness, 24-hour fitness gym, and doors were locked, and there was one individual parked in the parking lot, getting out of his vehicle and just walking over to read the sign on the door. But I actually know a few people that own gyms, and the devastation that they're going through, and for the premier and others to say, well, no, there is no lockdown anymore. Well, and that's very relevant, and again, very insincere in my opinion. And they're failing to really look at the big picture, and certainly not looking at individuals. And yet they're looking at different areas and saying, well, this is where we think the problem can be. And so it's disappointing. But going back to the budget, though, no new taxes. What a disaster. And I don't know, David, I don't think I gave you, maybe we did. Can you put up table 1, David, and just put that up for the people? And I'm afraid it's going to be too small for anybody really to see in there. But what we have there is a breakdown of the revenue for the provincial government. And under the first one is income and other taxes. And we're looking at $19 billion. Next one is resource revenue. If you look to the left, it was 6 billion, and we're down to 2.8 billion. Transfers from the federal government, and back, in 2019, they were promising us 9 billion, and this year it looks like we're going to get 10 billion. Isn't that fortunate? Investment income. So again, that'll be from our Heritage Trust Fund and whatnot. We've been at 2.8 billion down to 2.2. Net income from other business enterprises, there was a loss, and we're going to come up to $1.8 billion on this one. And then this is always the one that kind of fascinates me, and where we have to pay so much. But in premium fees and licensing fees, 3.9 billion up to 4.1 billion dollars we Albertans have to pay in order to have our licenses on our vehicles and other things. And then we have other revenue, but for a total revenue this forecasted year for $42.2 billion. But thank you, David. If you want to take that down, that probably, I got to pick up my paper there, dropped it. Probably wasn't very good for the viewers, but the bottom line is that the budget is out of control. They have no plan on balancing it. And what's troubling is the battle and the fight I want to say, between the public sector and the taxpayers. And again, whenever you have a crisis, you really need to bring everybody into the table and talk to them and let them see the situation and say, well, how would you propose that we, solve this problem? And what we really need to do is to bring in the public sector, all of the unions, and to sit down and to show them the cost of the public sector versus the revenue that the province has, or maybe I should say the budget, because the cost of our public servants this year is 54% of our budget is going to personal wages. And I'll break it down a little bit more, and we'll maybe talk. We'll have a tighter session just on the budget and what we can do. But there's a massive percentage, over 50% of the province's budget is actually going to full-time employment and their pensions and their other benefits. And what's probably more shocking, and what you need to realize about that, is with that, and then the taxes that our public servants are paying to Ottawa is just destroying our economy. And so when you think how much revenue we need in order to pay public servants and how few workers we now have, this is a snowballing effect. And for Premier Kenney to say, oh, well, we're only at 20%, of our GDP for our debt, and we don't want to go up, past 30%. But as this is escalating, it's out of control. And if you are running a business, you would realize that you need to cut back much faster. And so really, I think in the budget, that's all I'm probably going to talk about tonight a little bit, is the fact that it's out of control, that the government, rather than sitting down at the table with our public employees and again, our prioritized infrastructure and other things that we're doing, that it's just being screamed out from on top what they're going to do, and there's no input, I don't even think, for people to realize where we're at, and the willingness of Albertans to come together in order to look at balancing our budget. But I want to shift from there over to the lockdowns, and probably more important, what I want to talk about is I don't know how many of you had the opportunity to have ever listened to Lieutenant Colonel David Redman, and what he's talked about in emergency planning and pandemic. And he's been on the radio many times. Danielle Smith interviewed him a month ago, and Danielle Smith again interviewed him this past week on Western Standard. And I hope I'll get a link up on my page, so if those of you aren't aware of it, but just a phenomenal 2-hour interview with Lieutenant Colonel David Redman, and what should or could be done in an emergency situation. And I don't know, David, do you want to just pop up those first 2 paragraphs of on there, and we'll just kind of read them out, because I don't know if people can actually see them. But David Redman, a retired lieutenant colonel with 27 years of experience in the Canadian Armed Forces and former head of Alberta Emergency Management Agency. So he was the head guy brought in. I want to jump down to the bottom. Government took every emergency pandemic plan they'd ever written and threw them out the window when COVID arrived. No one followed the process, even though they had plenty of time and forewarning, as we had the benefit of seeing what was happening in China, Italy, Spain, and France before the virus hit us in mid-March. Instead, they panicked, started flying by the seat of their pants, and put the doctors in charge. Thank you, David. And so what he's said, and for me, these have been very damning information on what the government used to do for emergency planning versus what they did, and to just put the doctors in charge, or the healthcare in charge. And he kind of talks about, the wildfires at Slave Lake and Fort McMurray. And he says because it was a crisis to do with firefighting, they didn't put the fire chief in charge of everything. They still had the evacuation crews, the government had critical infrastructure, and Mr. Redman talks, or Colonel Redman talks about the different silos and how they're all supposed to be brought into an emergency room and discussed where it is. But probably the most important thing that he discussed in there is when Daniel Smith asks him, what should we do, and what do you think of the Canadian Constitution and the fact that we're losing our individual freedoms and rights. And his answer is quite profound there. And he basically says, that it says very clearly in the Constitution that it must be demonstrated on why they're going to actually strip away those freedoms. And he says they've never done that. And he says that not only that, when you're stripping away those freedoms and you're going to an emergency act, you actually are supposed to list which of those freedoms that you're going to lose. You're going to lose the freedom of assembly, or you're going to lose the freedom to work or to make a living. You're going to lose the freedom of travel. He says those should be absolutely written out and clearly defined and told how long they're going to last for. This is going to be for 2 weeks. What was that now? 11 months ago? This is going to be 2 weeks of flatten the curve. But anyways, he just talks about the complete abuse of government and how they've just bungled this whole crisis, and the way they continue to just perpetuate it. And again, this last week they've extended it for 90 days. And we're going to talk a little bit about Mayor Nenshi and his little speech that he gave, which was quite alarming to me and unacceptable. But the fear mongering goes on. But these lockdowns, again, that Lieutenant Colonel Redmond talks about, is how focused they should be. And he talks about one of the more important things, and he has 4 points that he talks about in a pandemic that you need to do. But you're supposed to look after the well-being of the province, and he says not the well-being of the healthcare system. And again, I'm going to jump back and forth here because they're all kind of interrelated. But I found it fascinating again that Mayor Nenshi, when he spoke, I think it was on Monday, are you kidding me? He says, people, our healthcare system has been running at 100%. It always does run at 100%. That's why we have wait times. And you have to realize that if we're selfish, and I'm paraphrasing his words here, so I apologize if they're not 100%. But he says, basically, if we're being selfish and going out and not wearing our masks, that we're going to destroy the healthcare system, and we have no idea where we're going to end up with that, and the deaths that we're going to cause is unacceptable. And again, he talks about the fun and the excitement of going out to Chinook Blast, and they're going to have another one this weekend. I guess it'll start tonight in Calgary, where people are welcome to come out and to go up and down the 17th Avenue and over to Eau Claire Market. And he talks about how wonderful that is, but it's okay because they're wearing masks. And again, I've talked about it in the past, but if you superimpose those areas that do wear masks versus those that don't, you'll see that the transmission of the virus is virtually the same. And it just, that the mask is not preventing the pandemic or the contagion of the virus from spreading in our society. And yet he says that, oh, we're great citizens if we're wearing a mask and it's okay to be out and about. I was in another facility the other day, and again, that you can walk into a restaurant, you got to be wearing your mask. You walk over, you sit down at the table, and then all of a sudden, like, masks aren't important anymore, and then we can all sit there and eat. And you look around in the room, and people are eating. If the virus is there, it's in the air, whether you're wearing the mask or not. But anyways, it's just interesting how they continue that fear mongering and where it goes. But David, can you play, and we'll see if we can hear Mayor Nenshi when he talks at the start of his sharing the concerns about the lockdown. Can you play that one, please? Well, I don't know if any of you were able to hear that, but I wasn't able. Yes?
I'm going to start it again.
Okay.
I'm just going to ask the group that's watching right now. Can you guys see the screen, the Twitter screen? I'm just going to wait for a comment on
Okay, go
Facebook or
ahead.
YouTube. So right now I am sharing the screen, and it's supposed to be Twitter. No. Okay. Let's see
Well,
here.
let's not worry about it, David.
All right.
The bottom line is what Mayor Nenshi is saying is that this new variant is really, really scary. And we all have to be patient. We all have to be diligent, and we just need to be wearing our masks and do all of these things. And again, it's just unbelievable to me how they just perpetuate. There's always this new fear, and where the fear is going, and how it carries on. But just to demonstrate, because I want to say that I think that from the numbers that I see, there's only about 20% of us that they would call us ignorant and not following the science, that are brave enough to say that, no, we're not worried. We don't feel we need to wear masks, and we're happy to go out and about and do our business, carry on our work, and to go and have fun, and to let our children play hockey, and to sing in the choir, and to participate in sports. And that's quite amazing to me that it's that few, that only 20% of the people actually feel comfortable and aren't feeling this fear. But just to demonstrate how real this fear is, for those of you who are really upset, and like, I'm bothered by it, and I'm frustrated by it, but there's people who they're well, they've lost loved ones because of suicide, overdose. Um, they're in domestic abuse. I mean, there's just a lot of problems that there's no question that we're going to see that the lockdowns are going to have a far greater impact for a far longer time than what this virus ever could have possibly done. That we knew that back in March when the first lockdown came down. But anyways, how many of you saw in the news that Mark Machen, the head of the Canada Pension Board, flew over to Saudi Arabia so he could get the first shots that were coming out of Pfizer? This is the top guy of our pension plan here in Canada, who obviously felt that the vaccine, which, and again, I want to say the experimental vaccine, was important enough that he flew over to Saudi Arabia, and now he's ousted, he's out of the Canada pension plan, and that was on a 1-day turnaround. Pretty scary. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that this fear mongering is very effective, and it's very effective on some very intelligent people that I don't know how much time he spends reading and looking at the different information out there, but it's amazing to me that someone of his status and his stature and where he was working would go to that length to get a vaccination early so that he could be protected. But I want to share a little story that I was told years and years ago about fear. And I honestly don't remember whether it was my grandpa or who told me about it, but my grandpa was a great storyteller. And as little children, there was nothing more exciting than Grandpa Ted would come, and we would climb up and get on his knee. Mom would pop some popcorn, and he would tell us a story. He'd tell us a story about the Peanut Man and other little stories. And he always had life lessons in there, and the importance of being honest, and the importance of listening to the Peanut Man or our conscience. And when we heard those things, and he'd nip our ear and pinch it and says, "That's the Peanut Man telling you to be good." But anyways, this story was about a Saudi prince, and how it was his job when someone was caught stealing, or other criminal charges that were they were death sentences, and they were brought before the prince to be condemned. And the prince would always ask the prisoner and say, um, you're going to have your head cut off here. You're condemned, but today I'm feeling very gracious. You can choose to be beheaded, or you can go through that black curtain and through that door and see what the rest of your life is going to be like, or what's going to happen to you. And anyways, after years and years of being in the prince's court, one of his servants finally asked him, and he says, "My prince, No one has ever chosen that black curtain and what's beyond there, but you've never spoken of it. Tell me, my prince, what's behind that black curtain? And his answer was simple: freedom. But that's the power and the impact of the unknown, of fear, and how it drives humanity. And nobody would take the unknown over death in this story. And I found it interesting. And again, it just brought back the reality as I heard about our head of our Canada Pension Plan um, getting ousted from his job because the fear was so great that he flew over to Saudi Arabia in order to get one of the very first Pfizer shots. And so the question is, and what's frustrated me in all of this is what I always say, well, do you want death by 1,000 cuts or instant? And right now, I'm just always amazed. And again, I'm going to zip back to the budget here for a minute, because when you go back 2 years ago, the new Premier Kenny was really pointing the finger at the NDP government, and rightfully so, with the billions of dollars that they had added to the deficit. And at that point, if my memory serves me right, he was going to say that by the time of the next election, if he isn't in place and you leave Premier Notley in place, we're going to be at $95 billion debt by 2023. And I think now, and again, I've read too many numbers, but I think we're going to hit $115 billion debt. And so it's much worse. But what I want to say here, though, is that Rachel is just going ballistic and saying how bad he's doing and not spending enough money and not doing these things. And you have to ask the question, we're being I see the NDP and the UCP as a double barrel shotgun. The one's got buckshot and the other one's got birdshot. And yeah, I'll say that's the UCP with birdshot. And the question is pick your medicine. What do you want to be shot with? Is it buckshot or birdshot? And I think most of us would say, well, we'd rather take the birdshot because we might live to fight another day, whereas the buckshot, in all likeliness, will kill us. And the fact of the matter is that death by 1,000 cuts is not a good way to go. And that's what we're being faced with right now, is death by 1,000 cuts. And the billions and billions of dollars that our provincial and federal government are racking up, and nothing to show for it. And that's probably my biggest criticism. And again, if you listen to Lieutenant Colonel Redmond, is that we spent billions of dollars, and on what and for what. In his plan, he talked about, and he says in there that, we knew by the time the lockdown in March came here, we absolutely knew that those at risk were 60 years and older, 70 and 75, and those with comorbidity issues, that they were already sick and could be dying at any time. And if those individuals contracted the virus, it was deadly. And we saw how deadly it was in the various senior care facilities when the virus got in there, and how fast it would take down a large percentage of the people. And so it's so frustrating, because he said, we could have set up facilities. And again, I'd say that we could have, instead of having quarantine sites where they take healthy people to get off the airplane or other things, is that we could have set up and taken seniors to other facilities. And especially right now, this last week, we hear that, that they're actually returning COVID patients back to the senior care facilities because the hospitals are so-called full, which they always are, but that they're sending them back there. And when you want to talk about criminal acts, I think that's a criminal act. But anyways, Lieutenant Colonel Redmond talks about an expense of $2 billion if we'd gone, and laid out the royal carpet and put them into nice facilities and brought in entertainment for them, and offered, the workers to come in and take 30 days on, 30 days off. But these are all part of things that were pandemic planning and should have been done, and they didn't. And instead, we spent $20 billion for very little, if anything, to show for it. There's no extra hospital built. There was no extra senior care facilities built this last year. We didn't increase our teaching facilities to get more frontline nurses or respiratory therapists. There was no extra training to see any surge capacity if we needed it. All of those things that would normally be done, we failed to do. And once again, this government is failing to plan, so they're planning to fail. And again, going back, that he just says they literally threw out the pandemic book and turned it over to the doctors to look after this when they have no understanding, whether it's a gym and how deadly it is. And I still find that hard to believe. And Mayor Nenshi, he backtracked on his statement, but he just says, I don't see how opening gyms is going to help us in our health and dealing with mental issues. And he's backtracked on that and put out a statement. But the point is that we have these elected individuals that are breaking the Constitution. We've got ministers that are locked up in jail and not being let out because they won't stand down to the government edicts. And there's really there's no scientific evidence data to show that they can demonstrate why they're taking all of these away. But anyways, next week, 5th and 6th, I'm going and speaking at a conference. It's the freedomtalk.ca, or the Economic Education Association of Alberta. I want to invite people to go to my website. We'll get some of these links up there. But what this conference is going to be about this year is what questions should be on a referendum this fall. We think it's very important. We have an opportunity for Albertans to speak. One of the questions on my mind, and again, I have to admit I've changed over a year, but I just personally don't think that the government should ever have the authority again to basically run our lives and tell us what we can and can't do. What the government should be doing is educating us, telling us what the risks are. There's a forest fire coming, there's a flood coming, there's a virus coming, and we should be educated and then make the decision and assess the risk that we're willing to individually take. And those with low risk tolerance, absolutely, you can do what you think is best. But those with high risk tolerance, people who want to climb Mount Everest or to fight the fire, I just think it's wrong for the government to come in on a point of emergency and saying, you know what, you no longer know how to protect and preserve your life. Therefore, we will do it, and we will take you over. We'll basically put you in isolation and in the camp to do it. But anyways, this conference is going to be a good one. There's again, the agenda will be there, but I encourage you to go to my website or to go to freedomtalk.ca and look at that and to sign up for it. It'll just be a good discussion on what should be on the referendum this fall. And I just can't say enough that we need to act. Too often in history, the human nature is to say not yet. Yeah, but we'll wait for that. And for us not to rise up and say, well, it's getting closer, the variant is very concerning. And for those who say not yet, we're in a real dilemma here. But I think that's where I'll wrap up, and to realize that, what the Wild Rose Independence Party is all about is about standing up for Albertans, to ensure that your personal freedoms are protected, and that we need to have a justice system, not just a legal system, but a justice system where people that have been mistreated will actually have the law to protect them. And again, we go back and we see of all the people that have lost their freedoms and the tickets and things that we can't get into our legal system to actually fight all of those. But I absolutely know that we can and will create a better government, one that will actually protect the individual's life, their freedoms, their property, their pursuit of happiness, and that will restrict the size and scope of government. Um, Again, I will be speaking at this conference, and one of the topics I'll be speaking on is accountability through recall, and how we can stop government from overstepping. But with that, David, maybe do we have some questions that I haven't really been following along there, but are there some questions that we need to go over today? Hey, Paul, what's your vision for the 21st century economy of Alberta? Wow. Well, under the status quo, and if we allow Ottawa to make the decisions to tell us what we can and can't do here in Alberta, I think it's very bleak. When you see the tens of billions of dollars of capital investment that have left the province, when you see the pipelines are failing to get built, our biggest and most robust industry is being destroyed, and I don't see a great 21st century. But if I look 2 years down the road in a wild rose government that is actually protecting businesses and people and their opportunity to do something, and standing up and realizing that, and talking to the enviro hypocrites who say that our oil and gas needs to be shut down, and we're happy to buy from Saudi or Venezuela or Nigeria, but we're not going to buy Alberta oil. um, we've got to turn that around. We need Alberta's economy to boom. We need to attract capital here. We just have such an economic opportunity here in Alberta if we go back to the principles of freedom and protect those, and protect businesses, and not have a huge government that has regulations that are 1,000 pages long, that we have a justice system where people are actually held accountable when they do something wrong to somebody else. And in that justice system, we actually have rehabilitation camps where people are rehabilitated rather than indoctrinated on how to be a better crook, or how to deal with drugs, and to fly under the radar, to be realize that there's only a 3% chance you're going to get caught if you're sent back out there. I think the sky's the limit. Will there be some pain in that transition? Absolutely. But the first two and big things is, number one, to put in our own police force with civilian oversight, where we're actually going to protect people, not attack people and jail people and fine people for just everyday living. And the other one, the big one, and we didn't really talk about this in the budget, but when you look at 54% of our budget going to public employees and bureaucrats, 30% of that goes to Ottawa. And so when we create the Alberta Revenue Agency and start collecting all the taxes, and again, I know all the naysayers, you can't do that, you can't do that. Well, just watch us. We will. We'll put it in trust, and that'll be the turnaround. Will there be some turmoil during that time? Absolutely. But boy, if we can't send our taxes, if we can't send our resources and our produce to the world, we certainly aren't going to send our tax dollars to Ottawa. It's just that simple. They can't say that we can't produce and sell our stuff, but yet they want to tax us to death. And so I absolutely, it's exciting to me to think of the innovations that we can and will do in a free Alberta, as opposed to one who's being shut down and oppressed by Ottawa with their policies that they continue in their hypocritical way to impose on us, but yet they use them all the time. Like I say, bringing in oil and gas from other tyrants around the world. I think last year that we spent $18 billion that could have gone to Alberta workers and companies and bought the oil here, had we finished Energy East pipeline or built some other ones. $18 billion that we've sent to places like Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Nigeria, and other areas that don't believe in labor laws, let alone human rights. But anyways, we just need to be that beacon of freedom, and I believe that we can be that here in Alberta with a wild rose government. Next question, David. How can we ensure a future government can't dip into a provincial pension fund? I got to read that once more. How can we ensure that a future government can't dip into a provincial pension fund? Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. A pension fund should be a separate fund. And again, the pension managers, and again, you look at Mark Machen, can't remember how to say his name. I look at it and then I have to think about it. But pension funds are supposed to be managed by a pension or a fund management team. Most everybody does that. I shouldn't say most everybody. With the new internet, there's a lot of people that are managing all of their own personal pensions and investments. But I think the majority of people go to a firm or wherever to have their pensions. And again, you can set up, and historically, I can't remember what the Canada pension plan used to be, but 50% of their investments had to be in government bonds. Well, that's a killer. They can't do that anymore. And so now they keep changing the parameters of what they can and can't invest in. But again, what we can do is set up the parameters that protect that fund on what they can and can't invest in. But no, the government should not be able to take money from that and spend it on whether it's, expenses or new infrastructure. But that's to be invested. And I would say the first and foremost thing would be to invest in successful Alberta companies. I remember a few years back, when the Alberta pension, not the Alberta pension plan, AIMCO, invested about $300 million in an oil and gas company here. And I actually knew one of the board members, and I talked to him. I said, that's so wrong. That this is government interference in the free market. And you guys have no business in loaning that kind of money to an oil and gas company. And he looked at me and he says, Paul, he says, the terms that we got on that were phenomenal. And we knew that our assets were secure and that we couldn't have found a better place to put $300 million than we did in that oil and gas company. And so there's pension managers that are talking about what they're doing, but he says that no, the assets are there. They had priority on those assets when they gave that loan to them, and they did very well on it. And so pension plans should be on their own, outside of government's reach, but you set up the parameters. But I hope that answers your question on that. But no, we don't want this for a political slush fund where politicians can make loans or give money to different groups because we have an Alberta pension plan. Is there another question, David? Do you have to wait till you get elected before establishing Alberta Police, Alberta Revenue Agency? Boy, Sharon, when I was asked to come on as the interim leader, I said, political strategists and politicians, what they do is they create a plan on how they're going to get elected for the next election. And then they strategize on that, and they have a rollout plan, and this is what they're going to do, and on 6 months out they're going to make this announcement, and they keep talking about these announcements right up until 3 days out, and realize that in an election, the last 7 days are where people will actually engage. And up until then, there's not a huge engagement. And so political strategists will save all of these ideas and then throw them out in the last 7 days, or at least they'll wait till the 30 days when the campaign starts. And what I said to the board, I said, I have no desire of coming on if that's what it is. We need to have our plan. We need to talk about it. And the best thing that could ever happen to Alberta is in 6 months from now, and that time has elapsed, that Premier Kenney would look at what we're offering and say, that's what we need to do, or that enough Albertans would see and to have joined our party and donated to it, that Premier Kenney would be pushed to do that. And I'll still say that today, that those 6 things that we really wanted to see getting done, starting with a pension plan, or not a pension plan, sorry, starting with an Alberta Revenue Agency, a police force, a pension plan, an employment insurance plan, an environmental act that would govern our environment, not Ottawa's, and then an immigration policy. Those are 6 things that absolutely need to be done now. Our Premier has very much shown his hand that he has no desire to protect Alberta's future. I've talked about some of the pipelines and how he said nothing when he could have acted on them. And there's many things that we believe he could and should do. He's talked about spending millions of dollars to study a police force. The one that we have isn't working. We need to replace it. And again, I could do a whole episode just on that and talking, because they, we're going to lose $150 million. Well, we're losing $18 to $20 billion right now, sending it to Ottawa. We could have that. The Alberta Revenue Agency is controversial. But the fact of the matter is that Section 121 isn't being honored in our Constitution. We can't sell our produce to the world. We don't get Tidewater access. So why on earth should we send them our taxes? If we can't send our product to the world, we certainly shouldn't be sending our taxes to Ottawa to spend and buy votes other places. But all of the things that we're talking about, Premier Kenney, if, in my opinion, cared about Alberta and our future, if he cared about our children and our grandchildren, he would start doing and quit talking. He's doing a wonderful job of delaying and saying, oh, we'll look at this. Oh, we'll study that. But he's not doing anything. And it's to the detriment of our businesses, to our lives, our health, our mental health, and certainly for our children and our grandchildren and their future. But thanks for that, Sharon. I hope that answered your question, that Premier Kenney can and should be doing these things now. Another question there, David. So what's the response on the economy? You moved from oil and gas to justice, police, etc., but still didn't identify any point that would bring the economy on track. There are other parts of the economy suffering, such as tourism, agriculture, transportation. What's Wildrose plan on these areas? Okay, I'll leave that one up there for a minute, David, so I can answer all of those. First of all, the government and the government's ideas that they're going to create jobs is usually wrong. The jobs that they create are bureaucratic jobs, and that doesn't add to the economy generally, because it's taking tax dollars out of the economy and the build into the bureaucracy. And that's why I say the size of government needs to be limited. And personally, I say that no government should be able to tax any person or industry more than 25%, and then can only, have its social programs and services within that framework. But the most important thing that government needs to do is actually have the rule of law. Prime Minister Trudeau said that the old National Energy Board wasn't serving the country's best interest, created the Canadian Energy Regulator, and put all kinds of new and extra stipulations in, upstream, downstream, which occurs for oil and gas, but he never talks about upstream and downstream of solar panel or wind or any of those so-called green energies. There's no up or downstream, but yet in oil and gas there is. But bottom line, to get the economy going is to reduce taxes, attract the capital because of the reduced taxes, and let the free world realize that, wow, this is a great place to invest with our resources, with our water, with our people. I mean, healthcare. There's so many areas that industry would invest in if it wasn't for the draconian policies that are passed not only at the federal level but also at the provincial level. And so to get the economy going, you need to back down and not be directing money into those different areas. When you talk about transportation, absolutely, one of the government's jobs, and they've done a very dismal job this last year as I drove around the province, is road maintenance, road expansion where we need it. They failed to prioritize on the areas that are hurting us. I mean, they've talked for years about, doubling the railroad track so that we could get more product back and forth on the railroad. And those are some of the things that government should do. But the bottom line is that we need the rules in place where business can look at it and pull out. Let's talk the tech oil sands project that they had, billions and billions of dollars to be spent. They finally withdrew because of the federal government's policies. And so we can go through and look where we've lost so many areas, even in agriculture. I mean, my good friend Rick Strankman, he put his life on hold and went to jail to get rid of the Canadian Wheat Board, which is the Western Wheat Board. And you can go through each of these different departments and realize where government is the problem. If you want our economy to boom and to fly and to take off, get rid of all the ridiculous rules, regulations, license fees. I mean, that's another great one, is what does it cost to get a license for a taxi license in Calgary? I don't know if any of our people know online. I'm not going to share that with you. But if you wanted to start a taxi business in Calgary, what would you have to pay? In agriculture, if you wanted to start a dairy herd, what would you have to pay to get that quota or that license in order to produce milk and sell it? If you want to have a chicken farm and you want to go into that, what would you have to pay again for that quota, that license to produce a chicken? I'll come up and I'll share these numbers with you in another episode, but you'd be shocked. And again, that's why the licensing fee in Alberta is $4 billion. That's what businesses and individuals have to pay in order to, whether it's drive a car or start a business. And we're not talking taxes. These are licensing fees. And they're draconian, they're backwards, they're wrong. It doesn't create a free market. It creates monopolies, oligopolies. And these things are just categorically wrong, but it's backing up and letting the free market take off, and again having rules and regulations that are in place that are actually beneficial on what needs to be done. I always loved using the rules and regulations. If you and I own 5-star hotels, what we would want and lobby the government to do is to say, oh, these are the minimum standards. You can put it down there now, David, if you want. Thank you. But excellent question. I hope I answered it for you. But if you and I owned a 5-star hotel, what we normally see in our country and other democratic countries is lobbyists go and say, you need to raise the standards. You need to have these shower heads, or you need to have marble, you need to do these things. And you say, these are the new standards. Hotels are one of the few things that, like I say, I love to compare, because if you're going somewhere, you can look and see, oh, a 1-star hotel. Wow, I can stay there for $60. Or, oh, wow, here's a beautiful 5-star hotel. It's $500. And we have that choice, that freedom to choose that. But we don't have it in many of the products and things that are out there. And again, the lobbyists have come in there. They've shut it down where the free market isn't allowed to operate. And that's what we want to do. But in the free market, there's a justice system. If you've done something or harmed somebody, that's the purpose, where you can actually take people to court to get retribution for the harm that's been done. But I hope that answered your question, VJ. Really appreciate it, though, because it is an excellent one. Is there another one there, David? Can Alberta impose tariffs on goods coming from Quebec? Well, first of all, yes, Alberta can impose tariffs. And when I say that, constitutionally, we're not supposed to. We're supposed to have free trade between the provinces, but I'm sure you're all aware the fighting has gone on the liquor boards, and whether it's Ontario or BC wine, that here in Alberta, for someone, I had an individual that was growing currants and wanted to make currant wine, and the hoops that she had to go through, just unbelievable. And so, boy, David, I'm going on. Can you put the question back up there again? I'm going off on a sidetrack. I apologize. Can we impose tariffs? One of the things that we can certainly do is, there's almost $1 trillion of goods that come into Vancouver, and about 700 billion of that goes through Alberta to the Eastern Canada. And that to me would be an excellent place for us to start with our first tariffs. Is anything that's coming through and going east, we're going to charge a fee to come through Alberta, whether that's a road tax, whether it's an entry tax, whether it's a safety tax, where we're going to go through and search and make sure there's no rats on there. But tariffs are an excellent leverage that we could use in order to get access to Tidewater with a pipeline. But yes, there's certainly lots of tariffs that go on right now. Quebec, like the milk tariffs, Quebec has 25%, I think, at least, of the dairy industry, and yet they don't have 25% of the population. But we can and will use tariffs as a leverage in order to say no more. We're going to exercise our freedom and be allowed to send our products to the world. But excellent question, and hope I answered your question there. Another one, David, from Murray. How would you deal with the public sector as far as funding? It always seems that the government can't give them enough money. Well, Murray, I up until a couple of years ago, I just felt like this was a no-win situation. And if you would have asked me 3 years ago how we're going to deal with this, I would have said, if I was the new government, well, like when Premier Kenney came in, I would have created 2 budgets. One is just, this is what we feel we can do, and without pushing the buttons on the unions or public sectors or whatever. and a second budget to say, this is what we feel that we need to do. But the only way that we could do this is if we put it out to a referendum and let Albertans vote it on this, so that we actually had a mandate from the people to have this austerity budget and cut, $15 billion out. And you could go back to that. But as I was looking at that, then I've got two or three friends who've always says, "Oh, we just got to cut, the public service. We got to cut their wages by 30%." And I just don't think that it's possible to cut their wages by 30% and get elected, because there's too many of them. When you see that 54% of our budget is going to those public services, you realize there's more of them than there is of us, and they're going to outvote it. But when the light went on in my head when I was looking at the numbers of the taxation and what goes down to Ottawa, and I realized, and again, I actually argued this way back, because when I was first elected as an MLA, we had a $20,000 living allowance. And so I think that oh boy, this is going back to 2004, but I think my salary was 47,000, and then I was taxed on that. And then there was a $20,000 living allowance that was non-taxable. And so I didn't get taxed. And way back then I started fighting and saying, why are we paying our public servants? I'll use the $100,000 for a senior teacher. $100,000, and then we see 30,000 of that at least go to Ottawa in a taxation. Anytime that there's a public servant, that those tax dollars have already been taxed, and they shouldn't be taxed a second time. And so I've said for years, what we need to do is just to keep, like, okay, the teacher, here's your $100,000, but that tax is coming back and staying here in Alberta. So in reality, instead of sending that money to Ottawa, we keep it here, and they're making $65,000. And so the way to balance the budget and not to harm and attack our union and our social workers and all of our public servants, our doctors and our nurses, is to keep the taxes here, because they still get their income, but we as Alberta taxpayers aren't paying it twice and then sending it down. And so the biggest thing is by collecting our own taxes here, we'll freeze their wages, but the money comes back to Albertans and reduces Alberta taxpayers' taxes, because we don't have to send it to Ottawa and then replenish it each time. But I hope that answered your question. It's an excellent one, but I believe it's very doable. But we need to be a prosperous and free Alberta in order to do that, because it's going to be a real battle with Ottawa. But I don't know why they would care whether we send an extra $20 billion down there when they spend $400 billion. What difference does it make whether we send ours or not? They're going to run deficits. So anyways, those are kind of the my feelings on that and what we can do. Another question, David. Can the legislation be modified so investment in tourism is stimulated? Currently, the ski hills and facilities are 40, 50 years old and over capacity. I got to read that once more. Can the legislation be modified so investment in tourism is stimulated? Well, VJ, I'm not 100% what you're meaning there. One of the biggest problems that we have is that we've allowed politicians to act and say, let's tax big business, let's tax small business. I remember my barber in Calgary, that his taxes, and it's just a small little shop, I don't know that if he would have had 600 square feet, but when he told me the taxes that he had to pay in his business license and everything, this was in Haysboro in Calgary, it blew me away. And he told me how many haircuts he had to make. And anyways, this is going back to 2012, and there was some pretty big business taxes that went up. And he told me, how many, it was over 100 haircuts more he was going to have to make in order to pay his monthly bills, just to keep up to him. And so the first 100 haircuts purely went to paying taxes, licensing, insurance, and his cost of doing business. And what people need to realize in our education system is that when we tax business, we're just taxing ourselves. It's just like taxing our nurses and our doctors and sending the money to Ottawa. And haircuts go up, restaurant fees go up. We can't raise the property tax $1,000 and think that a restaurant or a barber shop or dress shop or whatever isn't going to go up. And it's the same with the ski hills and stuff. That for companies to be able to reinvest and to modernize their equipment, those should all be tax deductible, and we need to reduce taxation. But I see a free and prosperous Alberta where the taxes are the lowest in North America, where people will want to come and start and set up a business because the taxes are low. It goes back to the old, Walmart. Well, Walmart understood that if they reduced their prices, that 8% of 100 billion is better than 10% of, I guess it'd be the same of 800 million. And so what Walmart and what I'd say good business people that are actually have to be competitive is they always say we'll take a smaller slice of a bigger pie. And that's what government needs to do. Is that we'll take a smaller slice and have a bigger business. I remember when Premier Klein says that we're going to drop the business tax, I think it was at 15 down to 8%. And the NDP and stuff went ballistic and said, this is crazy. But within 3 years, our tax back in 2005 went from $1.5 billion up to $3 billion. And again, this is another one of those personal attacks that Alberta had to endure because when Ottawa saw what they were doing, they started different programs again to attack us. But no, we want to be the most competitive place in the world. And I think that there can be billions of dollars invested on whether it's healthcare, tourism, agriculture. All of those things can attract money because we're not going to go after corporations and tax them. We want them here. We want them being innovative. We want them doing research, and we can allow that to happen. But again, it goes back to government policy and educated people that understand that low corporate and business taxes is a benefit to us because we have those things here. Even like an oil refinery. It was so upsetting to me that, in 2008, we had 5 companies that wanted to build refineries here in Alberta. I remember when I was very young, in the 70s, and what we had a refinery capacity here that was greater than the need for Albertans, and we were exporting that. But every 2 or 3 years there was a huge glut, and I remember buying gas for 10 cents a gallon, and my dad went out and bought a 10,000 gallon bin in order to get this gas because the refineries didn't want to shut down. We had that. What would Alberta be like today if we had 5 refineries that the government didn't say, oh, we don't want so many, we're going to control you, we're only going to allow one of you to build? Where would we be today had we had those 5 companies that applied to build refineries and had all of that product here? We wouldn't be at $1.15 gas right now. We would probably be at 20 or 30 cents gas because of the surplus that they'd be pushing out and that it would be here. And again, any economist knows that it's supply versus demand. And when you have a huge supply, they sell it out and we'd have the benefit here. But those are things that we can and should do. It's wrong that we don't, and instead we look at taxing and thinking, oh, we won't tax the individual, we'll tax business, we'll tax someone else. But no, we need that tourism. We could allow people to invest in it. The other problem, though, is just even the eco people that don't allow these ski resorts to expand and to have more activities during the summer and during the winter. And there's just lots that we can and should do. But anyways, I can't believe the thing's just tipped over. Says we've been going for an hour. I just think it's awesome, the questions that you have. What will WIPA do to lower utility costs? Okay, this will be the final one. Well, that was kind of the tipping point that got me back, that really got me started into politics, is when the government says that we're going to deregulate electricity prices. And when they deregulated them, all they did was oligopolize them. I just was disgusted with the whole thing, that we weren't allowed to set up and start generators. You had to go through a process, much like trying to build a pipeline. It was very stringent, and they kept saying, oh, we don't need more generation. Didn't drive it down. But there's 2 things that you can do. Is one, that you can regulate it and have to show your costs, or 2, you can actually open it up to a free market and allow people to start producing and to have the production here. But energy is critical. It's something that we need to look at. I think that there's still great opportunities for even in-river electrical generation. There's those that have certainly talked about atomic energy up for the oil sands. And I think we need to have a very open and honest discussion with Albertans on what we want to do, because one of the greatest benefits that you can have to be economically competitive around the world is low energy prices. And we'll very much be focused on that. What do we do to get the lowest energy prices possible in North America so industry can not only survive here, but actually thrive here in Alberta? And we'll be looking at that. Appreciate your questions. Please go to our websites. We really appreciate the feedback and the questions, but go and look at them and share them with your friends, families, co-workers. The most important thing that we can do is to act now and to get people to start speaking up. And we need you to buy your memberships. We need you to help get the CAs going. We need you to make some donations so that we can do more advertising, so that we can produce more leaflets and brochures to go out. We're starting to do some. I think we maybe even put in our first order for bumper stickers. But we need to get the message out there. Main Street media will not allow us to do it. And this is a win-win for everybody. A great government with low taxes, with the freedom to do things, everybody benefits, right? Right from the daycare worker to the highest executive in the province. And we need to realize this. This isn't like a East versus West situation that we're dealing with. This isn't about a rural versus urban situation. This is a win for everybody. This is a win for our children to have a fantastic education system. This is a win for Albertans to create a healthcare system where people can actually get in and get treated, not just treated, but with the most up-to-date treatment possible. All of these things are possible with a responsible government that's focused on serving the people and not having the people serve the government. But thanks for tuning in. Things are changing fast. It's a crazy world, but we've got to dig in and start fighting, because 2023 will be here before we know it. But take care and God bless.